Los Angeles, 1958. Clint Eastwood is digging swimming pools for a living, his hands raw from concrete work, seriously considering giving up on his Hollywood dreams after years of bit parts and rejections. At 28, he felt the clock ticking. Then his phone rings with an offer that nobody saw coming. It was for a TV western called Rawhide, but it wasn't the break anyone expected. You've got to understand what it meant to be digging pools in Hollywood. This wasn't some romantic, struggling artist story. Clint was doing backbreaking labor during long, punishing days, coming home covered in cement dust, wondering if he was chasing an impossible dream. The entertainment industry had been telling him for years that he didn't have what it took. The message was always variations of the same theme: too tall, too quiet, wrong look for the 50s ideal of a leading man. But here's what nobody knew at the time: that construction job was about to save his career in ways he never imagined. To understand how we got to this moment, we need to go back to the beginning. Clint Eastwood Jr. had arrived in Los Angeles in the early 50s with minimal acting experience and maximum determination. He'd been drafted during the Korean War, served as a swimming instructor, and figured acting might be more interesting than his other options back in Oakland. The move to Los Angeles wasn't easy. Clint arrived with barely enough money for a few weeks' rent and no industry connections. The Hollywood system in the 1950s was built around a very specific type of leading man: charming, conventionally handsome, with polished delivery that suggested expensive acting training. Clint was the opposite: 6'4", quiet where the industry expected charisma, thoughtful where it wanted quick wit. In those early years, Clint's daily routine became a study in rejection. He'd find a payphone outside a casting office, feed it quarters he couldn't afford to waste, and call his agent hoping for good news. The conversations were always variations of the same theme: nothing today, keep trying. One particular day captured the cruel mathematics of his situation perfectly. Clint stood at a payphone with his last 2 quarters, having already heard "nothing today" from his agent that morning. As he fed the coins into the machine to make one more call, this time to a casting director who rarely took calls from unknowns, he realized he was down to his final 50 cents. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. "Sorry, nothing right now. Try again next week." The line went dead, and Clint stood there holding the receiver, knowing he didn't have money for another call. But more challenging than the financial pressure was fighting against an industry that demanded he become something he wasn't. The Hollywood system expected energy where Clint offered restraint, conventional charm where he provided quiet intensity. Studio executives had spent years telling him to change, be more animated, more vocally expressive, more like the established stars who could project personality to fill every inch of the screen. When Clint tried to comply, the results felt false. When he reverted to his natural approach, he was criticized for lacking the energy that stardom supposedly required. Clint's first significant break came in 1955 when Universal Studios signed him to a contract. On paper, it looked promising: $75 a week to learn the craft while appearing in small roles. In reality, it was Hollywood's version of boot camp for actors who might never make it out of the minor leagues. Universal's contract player program was designed to mass-produce stars according to a formula: acting classes, voice coaching, publicity training where young actors learned to smile on command and give charming interviews. The parts Clint received during this period were forgettable at best. He appeared in B-movies with titles like Revenge of the Creature and Tarantula, playing characters so minor they often didn't have names. In Revenge of the Creature, his big scene involved getting killed by a giant monster. The role lasted maybe 2 minutes of screen time, most of which was spent screaming. But even these small parts taught Clint something important about his natural screen presence. Directors would often tell him to do less, not more. His instinct was to underplay scenes rather than oversell them. When other actors were projecting to the back row, Clint was finding the truth in smaller, more intimate moments. In one particularly frustrating acting class, an instructor stopped Clint mid-scene and said, "More energy. Sell it to me." Clint tried to project more enthusiasm, but it felt like wearing clothes that didn't fit. The other students were nodding along, but Clint felt like he was losing something essential about himself with every forced gesture. After 2 years at Universal, the feedback was consistently underwhelming. Studio executives reportedly told him he had potential but needed to work on his screen presence. His acting coaches suggested he study established stars like Rock Hudson and Tony Curtis, actors who commanded attention through charm and conventional leading man qualities. The problem was that Clint couldn't authentically replicate that style. When he tried to be more animated or traditionally charismatic, it felt forced and unconvincing. He was most comfortable when he could be himself, laconic, thoughtful, physically imposing but emotionally restrained. By 1957, Universal had decided not to renew his contract. The official reason was budget cuts, but industry insiders understood the real message: Clint Eastwood wasn't leading man material. At 27, he was facing the possibility that his Hollywood dreams might never materialize. This is where the construction work entered the picture. Clint needed money to survive while he figured out his next move. Through connections in the industry, he found work with a contractor who specialized in swimming pools for wealthy Los Angeles homeowners. The job was physical, reliable, and paid better than most bit parts he'd been getting. The work was genuinely demanding in ways that acting never had been. Clint would arrive at job sites before dawn, spending his days digging holes in the hard California clay, mixing concrete in portable mixers that seemed designed to break your back, and installing pool equipment under the relentless Southern California sun. His hands developed thick calluses, his shoulders ached from shoveling, and he'd come home exhausted in ways he'd never experienced from memorizing lines or sitting in waiting rooms. The psychological challenge was just as difficult as the physical one. Clint would be working on pools for people in the entertainment industry, producers who were greenlight films, directors who were casting leading roles, successful actors who had achieved what he was struggling to reach. The irony was sometimes painful. Here he was, literally digging in the backyards of people who had the power to change his career, while they discussed million-dollar deals over lunch on patios overlooking the holes he was excavating. Some homeowners would treat the construction workers as invisible, talking about industry business as if the crew couldn't hear or wouldn't understand. Others would be friendly but condescending, asking about the workers' real ambitions as if construction wasn't legitimate work in itself. Clint learned to keep his acting aspirations to himself. It was easier than dealing with either pity or unwanted advice from people who'd made it in the business he was struggling to enter. But the construction job also gave Clint something unexpected: perspective on what real work looked like and respect for the people who did it. The other guys on the crew had been doing this for years, supporting families, building lives around honest labor that required skill, reliability, and physical toughness. There was dignity in what they were doing, even if it wasn't glamorous or creatively fulfilling. The crew he worked with was a mix of experienced tradesmen and younger guys who were doing construction temporarily while pursuing other dreams. Some were musicians, others were artists, and a few were actors like Clint who needed steady work between auditions. There was a camaraderie among the workers that was different from anything he'd experienced in Hollywood, respect based on competence rather than connections or charm. Clint began to understand that there were different types of strength and different ways to measure a man's worth. The guys on the construction crew didn't need to pretend to be tough, they were tough, in practical ways that mattered in real life. They could handle tools, solve problems, work through pain, and take pride in craftsmanship that would last for decades. During this period, Clint continued auditioning for parts when his schedule allowed. He'd finish a day of construction work, clean up, and head to casting calls in the evening. The contrast was stark, from cement-stained work clothes to attempting to look like leading man material in a matter of hours. Those close to Clint during this time reported he was genuinely considering leaving Los Angeles and pursuing construction work full-time. The pool installation business was growing rapidly in Southern California. There was steady work, decent money, and none of the psychological punishment that came with constant rejection in Hollywood. The entertainment industry seemed to have made its verdict clear: Clint Eastwood wasn't what they were looking for. The months that followed were some of the most challenging of Clint's life. Without studio backing or steady acting work, he was competing with hundreds of other unemployed actors for the same small parts. The rejection became more frequent and more brutal. Casting directors would see his height and quiet demeanor and immediately dismiss him as wrong for whatever role they were filling. The financial pressure was constant. Rent on even the cheapest apartments in Los Angeles was expensive, and acting jobs were too infrequent to provide reliable income. Clint took whatever work he could find, more construction projects, moving work, whatever paid the rent. Each job was a reminder of how far he was from his original dreams of movie stardom. But the construction work taught him things about himself that acting classes never could have. He learned that he could handle physical discomfort, that he could solve practical problems under pressure, and that he could earn the respect of working men who judged people on competence rather than charm or appearance. The pool installation jobs were particularly revealing. Working in the backyards of successful people in the entertainment industry, Clint got a close-up view of the lifestyle he was trying to achieve. But he also saw the arbitrary nature of success in Hollywood, how much depended on being in the right place at the right time, or knowing the right people, rather than just talent or hard work. Some of the homeowners would ignore the construction crew entirely, treating them as invisible workers who were there to perform a service and disappear. Others would strike up conversations, asking about the workers' backgrounds and ambitions. A few would offer unsolicited advice about the entertainment industry, usually variations of the same theme: success required connections, timing, and willingness to play political games that had little to do with actual acting ability. These encounters reinforced for Clint that success in Hollywood wasn't just about being a good actor. It was about navigating a complex social and business system that had very little to do with the craft of acting itself. The construction work was honest in a way that the entertainment industry often wasn't. You completed a job, it worked or it didn't, and you got paid based on the results. During the pool installation projects, Clint also learned practical skills that would serve him well later in life. He understood how things were built, how to manage physical projects, and how to work with teams of people who had different specializations. These experiences would later influence his approach to directing films, where the ability to manage complex logistical challenges would prove just as important as understanding storytelling. The psychological benefits of construction work were just as significant as the practical ones. After years of rejection and criticism in Hollywood, it was satisfying to do work where the results were measurable and immediate. At the end of each day, Clint could see tangible progress: a pool that was closer to completion, a foundation that was level, equipment that was properly installed. This environment allowed Clint to develop confidence in his own judgment and abilities that extended far beyond construction work. He learned to trust his instincts about people and situations, skills that would prove invaluable when he later had to make decisions about roles, directors, and business partnerships in his entertainment career. But perhaps most importantly, the construction period taught Clint that there was dignity in all types of work, and that authenticity was more valuable than trying to fit into someone else's idea of what he should be. The entertainment industry had spent years telling him to change everything about himself: his height, his voice, his natural demeanor. The construction sites were the first place where being himself was not just acceptable, but actually advantageous. The phone call that changed everything came on a day when Clint was particularly discouraged. He'd spent 10 hours installing pool equipment in Beverly Hills, his back was killing him from lifting heavy machinery, and he was seriously considering whether to extend his construction work indefinitely. His agent called with news about Rawhide. The audition was unlike anything Clint had experienced with movie studios. Instead of a polished Hollywood office, he found himself in a sparse room with producers who looked like they'd rather be on a ranch than in a casting session. They reportedly tested him on practical skills as well as acting, having him demonstrate familiarity with outdoor work and equipment that might be used on frontier locations. When the producers asked Clint to improvise a scene where his character explained a work problem to the trail boss, something clicked. Instead of trying to project theatrical emotion, he drew on his recent experience reporting equipment failures to construction supervisors. His delivery was direct, practical, completely believable. Soon after, he got the call that he'd landed the role. But the real test came during his first week on the Rawhide set. The veteran actors and crew were watching to see how this unknown construction worker would handle the pressure of television production. In the first scene Clint filmed, the director noticed something unusual: where other actors were trying to fill every moment with energy, Clint was comfortable with silence. Between dialogue, he'd simply exist in the character without feeling the need to perform constantly. The crew started paying attention to this guy who could make doing nothing look interesting. Rawhide premiered in 1959 and became an unexpected success. The show ran for 8 seasons, making Clint a recognizable face to television audiences across America. More importantly, it gave him the chance to develop his screen persona in front of cameras week after week. The character of Rowdy Yates allowed Clint to refine his natural acting instincts in ways that movie roles never could have. Television production was fast-paced and unforgiving. There wasn't time for extensive rehearsals or multiple takes to get everything perfect. Actors had to be ready, authentic, and convincing in the moment. But here's what made the difference: Clint's construction experience had given him an authentic understanding of physical work and working-class dignity that translated directly to his cowboy character. He didn't have to pretend to be comfortable with hard labor or blue-collar camaraderie, he'd lived it. When Rowdy Yates talked about fixing equipment or handling difficult conditions, Clint drew on real memories of solving problems with his hands. The role also gave Clint something he'd never had before: creative control over his own performance. Television directors, working under tight schedules and smaller budgets, were more willing to let actors find their own approach to characters. If something worked, they used it. If it didn't, they moved on quickly. This collaborative environment suited Clint perfectly. The minimalist style that had been criticized in Hollywood worked beautifully for television westerns, where authenticity mattered more than theatrical projection. Audiences could sense that Rowdy Yates was played by someone who understood physical work and wasn't just pretending to be tough. Clint also began to understand the business side of entertainment in ways his earlier studio contract had never taught him. Television production was more efficient than movie making, with less bureaucracy and more practical decision-making. This pragmatic approach to storytelling appealed to someone who'd learned problem-solving on construction sites. The success of Rawhide proved that Clint's instincts about his own abilities had been correct all along. The entertainment industry had spent years telling him to change everything about himself, but the construction experience had taught him that authenticity was more valuable than adaptability. When he finally got the right opportunity, he was ready to be exactly who he was. This environment allowed Clint to develop the minimalist acting style that would later define his movie career. He discovered that audiences responded to his restraint, that there was power in what he didn't say as much as what he did. The quiet confidence he'd developed on construction sites translated perfectly to the laconic cowboy persona. During the run of Rawhide, something else important happened. Clint began to understand the business side of entertainment in ways that his earlier studio contract had never taught him. He learned about television production, about what made shows profitable, about the relationship between creative decisions and commercial success. The construction job that had seemed like a detour from his acting ambitions turned out to be essential preparation for his eventual success. The physical confidence, the understanding of working-class perspectives, and the appreciation for honest labor all became part of what made Clint's screen persona authentic and compelling. Working with his hands had taught Clint lessons that no acting class could have provided. He learned to solve problems methodically, to work as part of a team where everyone's contribution mattered, and to take satisfaction in completing difficult tasks through persistence rather than charm. These weren't just life skills, they were character traits that would later translate directly to his screen presence. The months of installation work had also given Clint a different relationship with failure and rejection. On construction sites, setbacks were temporary problems to be solved, not personal judgments about worth or potential. A broken piece of equipment meant finding another tool or approach, not questioning whether you belonged in the business. This practical mindset helped insulate him from the psychological damage that destroyed many other actors. Perhaps most importantly, the construction period taught Clint that authenticity was more valuable than adaptability. The entertainment industry had spent years telling him to change everything about himself: his height, his voice, his natural demeanor. But in the practical world of pool installation, being genuine wasn't just acceptable, it was essential. Workers who tried to fake their competence were quickly exposed and dismissed. When Clint finally got his break with Rawhide, he brought all of these lessons with him. The show's success wasn't just about finding the right role, it was about having developed the confidence to trust his instincts and the wisdom to know that his differences could be strengths rather than limitations. That phone call about Rawhide didn't just save Clint's career, it proved that sometimes the world is ready for exactly what you have to offer, even when you can't see it yourself.